Heredity, 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 heredity. Nung, Song, Sam.
Heredity.
Very good.
Heredity.
Everybody, boss, can I hear you say it, please? Heredity. Nung, Song, Sam.
Heredity.
Much better. Thank you very much. Some of you still did not say it, and I will be noting this down, and I will ask Kruti to help me write a note, okay? Because you should all be participating in this class. Okay, so heredity. What is heredity? Before we do that, who can tell me what it is in Thai,ภาษา Thai? Kawan, can you tell me in Thai? What is it? How does it sound in Thai?ภาษา Thai. Can you tell me?
What? Again, please.
Can you tell me what is this word? ภาษา Thai. Very good. Guitar, can you tell me this word? ภาษา Thai. ครับ
Kamapan.
Very good. And let me ask someone else, somebody I didn't hear before. Best.
Kamapan.
Thank you very much. Okay, that's good. So what is hereditary? Heredity is when we inherit things or we take things when you are born. You take some things from your father and you take some things from your mother. And we call this heredity. It's a key word, and you've just been pronouncing it, you've just been practicing hereditary. But there are some more key words in this subject which we need to practice. So heredity is one. The next key word is this word, genes. Genes. This word here, genes. Now again, I want to hear everybody say this. This is English science. I want to hear everyone say it. Listen to me one time. Genes. Genes. Nung, Song, Sam.
Genes.
Genes. Now, there's one other key word, one more important key word. This is called DNA. It's just DNA. This is not very difficult, but DNA actually is a very short number of letters for something much bigger. I'm not going to ask you to pronounce it. I just want you to say DNA. But if you are interested, it means deoxyribose nucleic acid. So you can see why I'm not asking you to pronounce that. But DNA makes genes. DNA makes genes, and DNA is what makes you, okay? DNA is what makes you. So I'd like everybody to say DNA, please. DNA. Nern, Song, Sam.
DNA.
DNA. Well done.
DNA.
Okay. Now bear with me. I may lose sound again, but I'm going to try and get my camera back because it's disappeared again. One moment, please. DNA. Now, DNA makes genes, okay? The DNA makes genes, and genes is what you get from your mother and your father. But not just you, not just humans. Animals too. Animals get genes from their parents, their mother and their father. And also, not just humans, not just animals, but also plants. Plants get genes and DNA from their parents, the father plant and the mother plant. But we'll talk more about that in just a moment. So the final keyword is this one. Listen carefully. Traits. 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 Nung, Song, Sam.
Traits.
Well done. Very good. Much better.
Traits.
So the key words for this subject are going to be heredity. So the key words are going to be heredity, genes, DNA, traits. Heredity, genes, DNA, traits. And basically, your heredity, as we just described, comes from genes. So genes you get from your parents. And genes are made of DNA. And together, genes DNA and hereditary give you traits. And we'll talk about what traits mean in just a moment. We'll talk about what are traits. What do they mean? But again, just for those who are interested in science, which is probably one of you, DNA means deoxyribose nucleic acid. Very, very long word, which is why, of course, we just say DNA, at least why you say DNA. Okay, so let's have a look at the next. What is heredity? What is it? What does it actually mean? It means that when living organisms, now remember this from our last topic, organisms, that means anything that is living. Living organisms make other baby organisms. So of course, your parents made you. You were a baby one time. Plants, male plants and female plants, make baby plants, tiny plants, seedlings. They're an organism. Animals like cats and dogs and fish and every other animal you can think of also make other baby organisms. And of course, they all use reproduction. And we talked a little bit about that last time, and we'll come on to this in our next topic, reproduction. So reproduction lets your parents make babies, or an organism's parents make babies, and you inherit. You have heredity. You gain something. And that means that the babies look like their parents, but you don't look exactly like your mother, and you don't look exactly like your father. You may look a little bit more like your father, or you may look a little bit more like your mother. So if you look more like your father, we can say, going back to that key word again, that you have your father's traits. Trait. You look a little more like your father. But if you have your mother's traits, you look more like your mother. And of course, if you look somewhat like your mother and something like your father, then you have traits equally from both. So remember, traits is what you look like, how you look. Do you look like your mother? Do you look like your father? Or do you look like half and half, for example? Half like your mother and half like your father. Maybe your father is tall. Maybe your father is medium. Maybe your father is short. So maybe you will be the same. Maybe your mother is very dark hair, or maybe your mother has curly hair. If you have curly hair, you have your mother's traits. So we know that heredity is all about living organisms giving traits to their babies or to their offspring. That's what we say in science. We say offspring. We don't normally say babies. Okay? So just to recap, if you look like your mother, you have your mother's traits. If you look like your father, pun, you look like you have your father's traits. And if you look like half like your mother, half like your father, you have traits from both parents. And dogs and cats and fish and insects and plants, they are the same. They have traits from their parents too. So some plants look like more like the father plant. Some plants look like more like the mother plant. Some insects look more like the father insect. Some insects look more like the mother insect. But generally, I still know that you are human because, of course, your parents are human. I still know a dog's parents are dogs because, of course, they look like dogs, etc. So you can look the same, but slightly different. So this happens for humans, it happens for animals, and it happens for plants. It also happens for many other things as well, like bacteria, etc. But humans, animals, and plants is what we are looking at in this topic. And it all happens by DNA. DNA in the genes. DNA in the genes. And here you can see an example of DNA, and here you can see one of the genes. Now, it might be the case that this gene here I'm pointing to is for, let's say, curly hair. So if you have curly hair, maybe this is the gene that you have. And if your mother has curly hair, maybe you got this gene from your mother. Maybe this next gene I'm pointing to, or this gene here, maybe this gene is for having very dark eyes. So if you have very dark eyes and your father, for example, has very dark eyes, then maybe this gene here is the one you got from your father. And maybe this third gene here, maybe this gene is a gene for being able to roll your tongue. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. What does that mean? For example, if I do this, you can see I can curl my tongue. Not everyone can do that. Have a go now. Everyone here, try to curl your tongue like this. Watch. See if you can do that. See if you can make your tongue curly. Alpha, you can't. Why? Okay. Now, wow, I can see you can. Kafu, can you do it? Can you make your tongue curly? Like that? Have a go, Kafu. See if you can do it. Now, some people can and some people cannot. So if you can, maybe this gene here is the one that you got. And interestingly, after this class, go and speak to your mother and ask your mother to do this. And if you can do it and your mother can do it, then maybe you got that gene from your mother. But, for example, if only your father can do it, then maybe you got that gene from your father. So this is a good example of a trait. It's a trait that comes from your parents. And usually, not always, but usually it comes from one parent. There are other examples of traits that come from parents as well. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But curling your tongue is one. So here we can see that all the genes, and we have 3 of them here, come from the DNA. And your DNA comes from your mother and comes from your father, in this case, to make a child who happens to be a daughter in this case. So where do genes come from? As we said, genes from the mother, and you can see the DNA from the mother here, and genes from the father, and here you can see the DNA and the genes from the father here. So genes from the mother, genes from the father come together and go to the child. And these genes are half from the mother and half from the father. Well, actually not the genes, but the DNA. But don't worry about that for now, okay? So half of the genes come from the father, half of the genes come from the mother, and they go into the child. So half of your genes come from your mother and half of your genes come from your father. Now, those genes may be stronger from your mother and they may be stronger from your father, or they may be equal. We're not sure. We don't know until we look carefully. So let's have a look again. So what does that mean? That means that you have traits, you have genes from your mother and from your father. And like curling your tongue, there are other traits that come from each of your parents. Some will come from your parents. If both your parents have very dark eyes, for example, then probably you will have very dark eyes as well. But other things such as the type of hair, curly or straight, color of hair, black or blonde. Now, there aren't many people in Asia who have blonde hair, unless their parent is Farang, for example. But usually you have different types of black hair. There's also something called widow's peak, which is the way the hair is made on males, for fathers and boys, for example. The other one is type of eyelids. The other one is color of eyes. Who's got the microphone on? Please, yeah, thank you, Sky. Color of eyes. And another big one, an important one, at least in this area, genes, is something called dimples. Dimples. Now, what are dimples? Dimples can occur in really three places, I guess. One on your left side of your cheek here, one on your right side of your cheek here, and you can also have a dimple. It's also called a cleft. Now, these are very important because they are strong indicators. They are strong traits, and usually you can see them in either your mother or your father. Sometimes, very rarely, you can see them in both, but usually you can see these dimples here on your cheeks in your mother or father. But for sure, if you have a dimple here on your chin, that will only come from your father. It will only come from your father. It does not come from your mother, ever. This cleft chin, if you or your father has a cleft chin, then of course he's your father. You know that for sure. It only comes from your father. And I have a little one here, you can see right in the middle, not very strong, but some people have very strong dimples here, this cleft. So there's an example. Another one, as we just said, is the ability to make your tongue roll or curl your tongue. So if you can do this, and if one of your parents can do that, then you have the genes or the traits from that parent. And the other one, another very, very clear one, is ears. Look at your ears. Everybody touch your ears like this. Now you can see, like me, maybe you can see, my earlobe is not fixed to my head. It's free. So there are two types of earlobe generally. Detached, which means not on your head, like that, and others are attached, which means it links directly to your head. That's a very strong trait. And usually, if your mother has this or your father has that, you know where that trait comes from. So let's look one more time. Traits come from genes. The genes come from your mother or your father, and they come to you. Some genes from your mother, some genes from your father, and things like the genes for hair, curly or straight, color of hair, type of eyelids, color of eyes, dimples, rolling your tongue, or earlobes are all called traits. Traits. Now I want to hear that one more time from everybody. Traits. Nung Song Sam?
Traits.
Traits. Very good. Thank you. Everyone again, please, in the class. Everybody in the class. Nung Song Sam.
Traits.
Well done. Much better. Traits. So remember, traits can be hair, eyes, dimples, tongue, ears, color of eyes, straight or curly hair. And if you look at your parents, you can usually see where those traits that you have come from. So after this lesson, go to your parents, have a look at your mother or father, and see what their ear looks like. Do you have the same ear? Look at their dimples. If they have dimples, do you have dimples? Or does only one of your parents have dimples? Look at the color of their eyes. Is it light brown or dark brown? And usually, if you have the same color eyes, that's a trait from one of your parents. Okay, so here's the traits, and here's the examples we were talking about. We talked about the chin. So if your chin is the same as one of your parents, we have something called the cleft chin or no cleft chin. Another one mentioned in the book is widow's peak. What does that mean? It means that men or boys, as they get older, make this shape of hair on their head. So if you don't go bald, then either you have this shape of hair, and as you can see, I don't have that shape. So I don't have this peak in front. And that's a very strong trait with men, fathers, to sons, their boys. Girls don't get it, at least not very often, but boys get it very clearly. Another strong trait is this one, dimples. You can see in the face here, we have dimples. And no dimples. Brown hair or blonde hair, or we should say here in Asia, we should say brown hair or light brown hair. Another strong indicator trait is freckles. Look at these dots on his face. Freckles. Freckles are also a trait. So you either have freckles or you don't. Now, many Farang children have lots of freckles, but Asian children, not very often. It's not so common in Asian children, but there are some. The other one, the big one, of course, is eye color. You can have dark brown, light brown, and sometimes in Asia you can even have green eyes. And there's a reason for that, which I won't go into, called recessive genes, but basically some Asians, quite a few actually, can have green eyes. And of course, earlobes. Look at this man's here. Ear is not attached, and this one is attached. So there's another example. Brown and black hair, widow's peak, brown eyes or blue eyes or brown eyes and green eyes or light brown, dark brown, and free earlobes. But remember, it's not just humans, but it's also animals and it's also insects. It's also animals and insects. So that's why a baby horse, a foal, looks like a horse. It won't look exactly the same as its parents, but it will look obviously like a horse. Cats, obviously, you can tell baby cats are kittens. They're baby cats because, of course, they look like cats. But cats, for example, now this is interesting, well, maybe it is, cats are obviously cats, but they're very different because these cats, mother cats, can actually give birth to, at the same time, to babies from different father cats. So sometimes when you look at many cats together, many kittens, they all look very, very different colors. And that's because cats can actually reproduce at the same time from different male cats. So they can give many, many different colored kittens. Ducks, in this case a duck, a baby duck, does not, as you know. They all look the same. In fact, they look very, very similar. So the traits of a horse look like a horse, the traits of a cat look like a cat, and the traits of a duck look like a duck. But as you also said, you also look at insects. Now here's an example of where the baby doesn't look immediately, at least the first time, very much like the parent. A tadpole and a frog. A tadpole does not look like its parent, but when it gets older, it does. A caterpillar does not look like a butterfly, but a caterpillar is the baby of a butterfly. But when it gets older, it will look like the butterfly. So some offspring, some babies are born with the traits of their parents, and some babies, particularly in the insect world and in the amphibian world, do not look like their parents. Getting a very sore throat. And of course, as we said, it isn't just humans, animals, and insects. It also includes plants and bacteria. Coconuts, for example, the offspring of a coconut doesn't look very much like a coconut tree, doesn't look very much like a tree at the beginning, but it grows very quickly to look like a tree. And that is true with all flowers. They have traits of their parents when they get much older. Okay, so now we've talked about some different words. We've talked about some key words. I want us to look on page number 25, 25. Nati 25. Everyone turn to page 25 in your workbook, please. And what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to look at these key words here: different, traits, heredity, trunk. Now, by the way, trunk in this case means the long nose of the elephant, the long nose of the elephant. So different, traits, heredity, and trunk. And I'd like you to answer question 1, A to D. Katam Nung A Tung D. And I'd like you to answer those questions and put the correct word in the space. Put the correct word in the space. The passing on of traits from parents to their young is known as. So passing traits from parents to young is known as what? Is it different traits, heredity, or trunk? The baby elephant has a long what? Inherited from the parents. So which one of these words shows what the elephant inherits from the parent? The young of frog look what from their parents? They look what? Is it different traits, heredity, or trunk? And the final question, the color of the eyes and hair are some examples of what that can be passed on from parents to their offspring. Parents to their offspring. Okay, let's go through the first answer and we'll see if everyone can tell me. I'll ask everyone to say it at the same time and they can tell me. So question A, the passing on of traits from parents to their young is known as what? Known as what? Ready? Nung, Song, Sam. Alpha, what do you say? Which is the correct word?
Heredity.
Heredity. Kawan, what do you say? What is the correct word?
Trust.
Okay. Pun, what do you say? What's the correct word for A? What do you think it is? The correct answer is, of course, heredity. Heredity. Passing traits or passing DNA and genes from your parents to young is called heredity. If you are correct, give yourself a nice red tick. Give yourself a nice red tick. So that we know that question A is already heredity, so that leaves us only with 3 more. B, the baby elephant has a long what inherited from the parents? A long what? I'm going to say 1, 2, 3. If you know the answer, say it. Ready? Nern, Song, Sam.
Trunk.
Thank you, Alpha. Thank you for writing that. Everybody else on the call, please. Ready? Nern, Song, Sam.
Trunk.
Trunk. Well done. Very good. The answer, of course, is trunk. Well done. Very good. Pasatai. What's the long nose called in Thai for an elephant? What do we call that? Pasatai.
One.
Nwang. Is that what it's called? Really? Nwang. Okay. Thank you. Question 3. Question C. The young of frogs look what from their parents? Something of frogs look different. Oops, look what? Look what from the I gave the answer away. You wrote different. Okay, everybody tell me the answer. Nung, Song, Sam.
Different.
Yes, you
Different.
all heard me say it by mistake, didn't you? Yeah, I know you did. Boo, boo, I say. Okay, let's have a look. Am I correct? Are you correct? Yes, different. And finally, the color of the eyes and hair, that means your eyes, your hair, my eyes, my hair, are some examples of what that can be passed on from parents to their offspring.
Trace.
Everybody say the answer together, please. Ready? Nung, Song, Sam.
Trace.
Well done. Much better participation. Thank you very much. The answer, of course, is yes, traits. If you have all those correct, please give yourself a nice red tick. Okay. Now we're going to go back and just try and just look again. I want to look again at a couple of things. Just want to remind you to make sure everybody understands. This again. So let's recap. Where do genes come from? Where do they come from? They come from your mother and they come from your father. And together they combined to make you as a child. Or if you're a baby duck, it comes from the father duck and the mother duck to make a baby duck. If it's a frog, mother frog, a baby frog, to make a tadpole. If it's a flower, from the mother flower and the father flower to make a new flower. So basically all genes come only, well, yes, come only from your parents. They only come from your parents and they make your child. Those genes give you traits. Those genes give you traits. And examples of traits that make you different from both your parents, but similar. So you look something like your mother, you look something like your father, but not exactly. They are called traits. And those traits, examples of traits, are these. The chin, the cleft chin. Now remember when we talked about that? Cleft chin. The shape of the hair. The shape of the hair. Not just is it curly, not just is it straight, but the shape of the hair. And this one, called the widow's peak, is particularly for boys and fathers. It's particularly for boys and fathers. If your father has this, almost certainly the son will have it, almost certainly. Another important trait is dimples, and we'll talk more about this later. We're going to talk more about dimples later, but dimples. So either you have dimples or you don't have dimples. If you do have dimples, then almost certainly your father or your mother will. Now, by the way, notice I keep saying almost certainly, and I'll tell you what I mean by that later. Another key one, of course, is hair. Color of hair, and whether hair is curly or whether hair is, okay. So hair is another important one. Color of hair, and whether hair is curly and whether hair is straight. And again, if you look at the color of your hair, and if you look as to whether it's straight or, dark or light, usually your parents, one of your parents will have the same color or the same type of hair. Eyes, same shape of eyes and same color of eyes. Usually children have the same color and shape as one of their parents. And another big important trait, my goodness me, I keep losing my camera. This is ridiculous. Another important trait, there we are. And another important trait is earlobes. Earlobes are very, very strong traits. Either your mother will have it or your father will have it, but either your earlobes will be free, detached from your head, or they will be attached. You'll have this shape or you will have this shape. And usually one of your parents will have that shape too. So you will know whether you got that from your mother or your father. Now, why do I keep saying usually? Why do I keep saying usually? Because sometimes traits don't come from your mother or your father. Traits can come from your grandparents. So usually on your father's side, you might find that you look more like your grandmother. And on your mother's side, you might find that you look more like your grandfather. That's because men or boys take a lot of traits from their mother's side, whereas girls take a lot of traits from their father's side. So in fact, yes, you will look like your mother. Yes, you will look more like your father, but your traits may mean you look more like one of your grandparents. That's because your parents get some traits from them and they may not show it in themselves, but they show it in you. And that is true also of plants and animals. Less so in plants, but true in animals all over. Okay, we only have 5 minutes remaining, so we'll go through the rest of this quickly. And remember, this includes all living organisms, including plants and animals. So there were the answers to the traits. Now, there's one more set of questions I'd like you to answer, which is question 2. Question 2. And I'd like you to look at this picture. I'd like you to look at this picture. And I want you to answer question A and question B. Question A and B. Now, we're not going to finish this question in this class, but next class, I'm going to ask you for the answers for this. But for now, you have 2 minutes, and I'd like you to answer question 2A and 2B. Song A at Song B, Nati Ha. Starting now, please. Starting now. So the first question says, in what way does the son look like his father? The second question says, why does the son look like his father? I don't know who started the meeting, but that's the only person who can turn that off. I can't mute. Okay, everybody should be answering that question now. The first one should be easy. In what way does the son look like his father? How does the son look like the father? What looks the same?